Hey, Jess.
Hey Matt, good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I'm doing wonderful.
I am also doing wonderful. We just had a little bit of a brief introduction with our guest today, and it's funny because before we started recording this episode, before I jumped on the camera, if you will, I was spending a good probably 10, 15 minutes thinking about all the different episodes we've recorded and the folks that we get to meet, the journeys and the stories that we get to hear. And I've just kind of become a little bit overwhelmed with I can't believe I'm getting like a front row seat to this show, you know? So a huge thank you to all of our guests who have been able to come on board. And I want to get your thought on this one really quick here. Is there anything that you've learned, or maybe a high level lesson? We won't pick on a guest in particular, but any high level lesson that you're just like, wow, this thing has just really stuck with me the whole time.
Oh Matt, there've been so many lessons. That's hard to kind of pick one. I mean, we've had so many amazing conversations with founders from different backgrounds who
Mhm.
all have, kind of a different why and what drives them and problems that they're solving. So gosh, I
Yeah,
can't even say that there's one thing I could pull away and say this is the one thing that I've learned. It's just
I
been an
like it.
incredible journey.
I like it. I hope our listeners feel the same, that every episode they're just like, oh my gosh. And this is a perfect segue, Jess, of this diverse background. This is a perfect segue into who our guest is today. This is actually an amazing individual who I know has a background that I can't wait for her to share it. But I've also had like an amazing, very insightful dinner with this person as well. And I'm just stop going to saying this person, and instead we'll bring her up on stage and into the episode. Roselle Safran, how are you today?
Excellent. Good to see both of you.
It's
Nice to
great
see
to see
you.
you. It's great to have you here. Thank you. Thank you. Roselle, first off, thank you for being here and taking the time out. You are an extremely busy lady, so I'm very happy that you took out the time to meet with us here. And with that said, let's talk about the background of that busyness. Who are you, and where are you at now? What are you working on? And please, I want our listeners to understand who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah. So I am the founder and CEO of KeyCaliber. So the product shows organizations what assets they have, what's
Hmm.
most important, what's most at risk, how well it's covered, gives the fundamentals so that organizations know what to do to improve their security and risk posture. And we've been in business for about 4 years now. We started when the pandemic began, so perfect timing.
Perfect time to
Just
start a
went off,
company.
and yeah, and it's been a really exciting adventure to see the way that the product has grown. Um, yeah,
Oh, that's fantastic. I have to I have to include this, Rosal, only because this is likely going to be part of what we talk about today. But this is not your first company as a founder, correct?
it's not so clearly. I'm crazy to do this a second time. Yeah,
All right,
yeah.
let's talk about let's get a little bit into then kind of like the what why did you decide to start Key Caliber where you're at now? I think after that we'll probably try to understand more about you as a serial founder, but let's start with Key Caliber. Let's start with the pandemic hits, and I'm sure it wasn't like pandemic time. I'm going to go ahead and start a company, right? Perhaps the opposite. It was like, I need to start this thing, and the world's going into a major epidemic right now. But let's talk about that original part. What drove you to start Key Caliber?
So what drove me for Key Caliber was similar to what drove me for my previous startup Up Level, and that was that before being an entrepreneur, I was a cybersecurity practitioner.
Mm,
So I was at the executive office of the president during the Obama administration, and I was leading cybersecurity operations, so defending the network used by the White House and the rest of the organization. And before that, I was at the Department of Homeland Security in the division that was then called U.S. CERT, now it's CISA. So I had lots of experience seeing where there were pain points and where there were problems that were not being solved by the current technologies. And so what we're solving at Key Caliber is very fundamental. You need to know what you have. You need to know where your crown jewels are and what type of risk you have.
mhm.
But the process has been so antiquated. There
Yeah.
are so many folks that spend lots of time in spreadsheets and doing surveys and questionnaires.
Mm-hmm.
So when we originally began with KeyCaliber, we wanted to just automate that process of identifying what the crown jewels are.
Mm-hmm.
And what we were competing against was literally going to different business units and saying, well, what do you think is most important? And then you get all sorts of errors and omissions, and you get ulterior motives, which was interesting for us to hear about, where folks would say, yeah, this is a critical asset, because they wanted more funding for their division.
Mm-hmm.
Or they would say, no, this is not a critical asset, don't worry about it, because they didn't want to deal with extra security controls.
Mm-hmm.
And there were just so many reasons why that process was so flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wanted to just bring it into the 21st century, make it a data-driven, automated process. And so we use machine learning to compute an impact score for each asset. So now you know where your critical assets are without having to do a survey every 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And this was something that I felt was really necessary, because if you don't know what your critical assets are, then you can't prioritize well.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't prioritize well, then you're not using your resources most efficiently.
Yeah.
And everyone is tight on resources.
Yeah.
No matter how large the company is, you're doing lots with little, relatively speaking. And so when I was a practitioner, I wanted to feel that I was optimizing the team's time and our resources. And so that's why I felt this was paramount for getting to that point.
I gotta say, Roselle, this is an interesting approach of starting because you specifically understand the business pain points and you're looking to solve. And I think, and that's, I shouldn't say that's a surprising thing, but it's more of a, like, sometimes we hear folks and they're like, I wanted to make amazing tech because I know how to code really well, or I know how to write this thing. And they're like, yeah, I wanted this amazing product. And then I went and found out who could use this product, right? As opposed to, I know exactly what this pain point is. And funny enough, I'm looking around, no one else is solving this thing. So I want to go and do that. I'm curious, when you're going after, and you're obviously trying to address pain points with an organization, as opposed to like, hey, here's how I can do this thing better than your current implementation. And meaning you're not trying to one up a product or a competitor. You're trying to modify a business process. You're trying to change habits, right? How does that, like, how tough of a battle, how uphill of a road is that? Or is it one, I should say?
It depends on who you're talking to. Because there are lots of people who get it and who love the idea of bringing the process into the 21st century.
Yeah.
And then you have folks who don't want to change. They've been doing their interviews and questionnaires for 20 years, and that's what they know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's often a challenge with cybersecurity in general. Is sometimes people are set in their ways.
Mm-hmm.
And we have an uphill battle as defenders. And I'm a mission driven founder. The reason why I start companies is because I see problems in the industry that need to be fixed, and I want to fix them because I've been a defender and I know the struggles.
Yeah.
And so I always look at it from that lens. And that's been the way that I've operated from the beginning. Is we need to solve this problem because the teams are struggling because they have this problem.
Gotcha. That's great.
But sometimes the teams, they're just cool with struggling. It's just it's funny how that is sometimes, but more and more we see people get it. They know they need to have a different approach because the security teams, they're just overwhelmed if they can't prioritize efficiently.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. And Roselle, I worked at a company a few years ago where we were, doing something similar in industrial security. So taking away those spreadsheets, and I understand that battle. People love their spreadsheets, and they see this new technology as, oh, I don't know, this is changing the way we do things, and it's a it's a worthy battle to fight. So I commend you on that. So want to talk a little bit about, a lot of folks listening, I think today probably might be a practitioner thinking about a problem they're aware of that they want to solve, but it's challenging being a founder. There's a lot that comes with it. It's not, you're not working for somebody that you can leave at 5 o'clock and kind of leave your work there. So, talk a little bit about that journey and, the transition from working for somebody to building this company and what that looks like for folks.
Yeah. So for me, when I made the transition from working for someone to being an entrepreneur, it was a very stark contrast because I was working for the government, which operates on a very different cadence. And so it was basically going 0 to 180, like, in terms of how different the dynamics were. I mean, being a founder, you're always running. You're always just running as fast as you can because time is just not on your side. And it's way more stressful. To be realistic, way more stressful. And you can't shut off for the day the same way. It's kind of like being a student where you're kind of always on. Um, and and so there are definitely challenges with being a founder. It's not the easy road. It's not for everybody. And I sometimes do events where I speak to aspiring entrepreneurs or business school students, and I talk about some of the traits that you need to have, and being resilient is so critical. I mean, if you're working for somebody else, you don't have to be that resilient necessarily. I mean, everything is the path is not going to change that much, and you're certainly not going to be making the decisions on where to go if the path needs to change. But as a founder, you have to have your pulse on everything and know when you need to switch gears. So that's a big difference. And then the other side of it, I always mention to folks that are thinking about starting a company is you have to be really thick-skinned because you are going to get rejected multiple times every day, whether it's by investors, customers, partners, employees. It's a nonstop stream of rejection. And for lots of people, that is too much to stomach, more so even than the resilience side of it. But it comes with the territory. And for me, even though there is that whole side of it, and I knew that going into this one, it's still outweighed by the benefits of having a crazy idea and seeing it come to fruition and help people.
Roselle, there's like a bunch of threads you talked about. I want to like pull on each one. I wish we had like a day to record this. I want to go back to one thing you said in the beginning about kind of that change, that shift from a government lifestyle, a government work lifestyle, if you will, to then kind of starting your own company. What is it? And only because we've actually spoke with some folks before who have also made that same change where they leave from either a government or specifically a DoD position and then go and start their own thing. What is it in that kind of position or within that work lifestyle? What is it? Is there anything there that prepares you for what you're about to go into? Because you're right, it is a completely drastic shift. I mean, everything changes. Everything. Like it's the way you keep track of time, the way you keep track of expenses, the offices you go to, what you have access to, what you don't have access to, limits, the ability to accept a gift, right? Like even the tiniest little thing changes. And I'm curious, how does that prepare you for then going out on your own? How does that prepare you for that resiliency you spoke about?
Well, sometimes it prepares you for being able to navigate complex office politics. And that can sometimes be very beneficial. especially if you're selling to enterprises, there's often office politics involved with every customer that you're going to deal with, and having an understanding of where you how you can be effective in getting to the right people and not piss anybody off
Yeah.
and still try to move it along. So some of that, um, you can certainly pick up from a working in government organization or any large organization, frankly, and then that becomes something that you can apply. Um, and also, of course, having the experience of seeing what are the challenges and how the day to day works. I mean, that was obviously for me one of the biggest knowledge areas that I developed was understanding what the security teams were facing on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
What was interesting was when I switched gears and and I started selling to large corporations, my first thought was they're going to be light years ahead of where we were in the government because we're just the government, we're a small agency, it was very political, so we had very limited resources.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to start talking to these large financial institutions and see that they're 10 years ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
Not the case. Not the case at all. In fact,
Yeah.
they were often behind us.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Wow.
that was really eye-opening. And now
Mm-hmm.
I understand it better now. I mean, the fact is that cybersecurity in this country to an extent began with the government
Mm-hmm.
because the government was the first to acknowledge that this was a problem where resources needed to be devoted to it.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, industries have come to that same conclusion. But the government was actually, in some ways, the first, or if not the first, one of the first. And so now it makes more sense as to why these larger companies that had way more money still weren't as far along.
Yeah.
But that was certainly something I was not expecting.
That's a it's an interesting like juxtaposition that you're in where your experience actually gives you a chance and one thing that I've always appreciated, especially as like a practitioner, is when you can walk into an environment and you can say to someone, I've been here before. I know this problem, right? I know these roads. I can help you navigate them. And it's got to be a huge asset for you to be able to walk into or had to have been able to walk into an organization and someone's like, oh, we're dealing with this, and that. And you're like, I solved that 2 years ago. I know exactly how to go about doing this. And I think the takeaway that I'm getting from this is if you're in that founding role or you're in that role where you're trying to move a startup along and everything, you never know where your strengths may be and the strengths that you can pull on. I think what you went into as seeing like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to really learn how to move up to the enterprise level, when in fact you were like, wait a second, I'm actually already there, if not ahead of some of these organizations. So it's a flip. It's the script flips a little bit. And now you're able to say, I've been here and I've done this. And there's a reason I wanted to pull on that thread, because I'm always curious about the differences between the two. I know there's a lot of folks, and I hope there's a few of our listeners too, who are in that, government service to private industry transition role. And even if it's not from a founding perspective, it's kind of like, how do I go about navigating this, or how do I go about dealing with that? And I think pulling on your experience and the things that you've done, even if they can't be a line on a resume or they're a gap in time, depending on clearance levels and things like that, you still have a lot of experience you can pull on. So use that to your advantage. Oh, that's a great perspective.
Absolutely. Yep. And I will say, coming from having the experience of who we're selling to, also it provides a ton of credibility. And to be realistic, as a woman in this industry, you have to have 10 times the credibility of the guy in order to have the same conversation. And so being able to talk about the problem from that vantage point of having
Mm-hmm.
experienced what they're experiencing makes a significant difference.
Yeah, that has got to add a different order of magnitude to the task as well.
Yes,
And I'm glad you
yes.
called that out as well,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it compounds the, if I'm a founder, and I'm going to quickly get out of my depth here, and I'm okay with that because I'm on this show with you two, and it's, I want this conversation. But if I'm a founder, the kind of preconceived notions that I have as a founder are something that I have to be aware of as you walk into a boardroom, as you walk into a meeting, and I'm glad that you've recognized that, but then also been like, hey, everyone needs to be aware of these things, as you go into it, because it changes your perspective. you know um, I hope that it doesn't change the road that you have to drive on. I hope that the road is the same,
It's not.
and that, and I was going to
It's
say,
not.
we want the road to be the same, right? Future state, we
It's
want the road to be the
yeah.
same.
It's not. I
Hmm.
mean, and I knew this going into it, especially the second time, and you deal with it. It's not the same road. I mean, women make women receive 2% of the venture capital that men
Hmm.
receive. So it's just a different dynamic completely.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's got to present. I think what I want our listeners to hear about this, and Jess, I want your thoughts on this too. What I want our listeners to take away from this is, it's really easy to hear the 5-year afterwards journey of like, yeah, I run this successful thing, and it's great, and I have X number of employees, and here's my ARR, and here's my every, it's great to hear that. But like that first month of, I'm going to do this thing, right? And result, the level of confidence that you have to walk, to get out there and be like, I'm going to do this thing, is astounding, and it grows with different demographics. And I want folks to be aware of that. It's a very admirable thing to start with, as opposed to, hey, me and my college buddies, we built an app and we're just going to do a thing, right? It's very different for folks. I hope our
Yeah.
listeners are hearing this, and are noticing kind of some of the things, and the way that this journey, ignore the way that the journey is different. The journey starts very differently for people. It is severely more daunting for others than it is for some, and that's got to be a consideration taken into play when you meet founders and you hear about what that company's doing and whatnot. Because Roselle, here's the thing: you did not identify a single problem that I could not equate with, that I have not been in there. Between Jessica and myself, I'm gonna tell you right now, we've watched the spreadsheets come out, and people being like, here we go, let's do a
Yeah.
thing, right? And it's like, everyone can sit here and be like, what year is it? This is so antiquated, right? So we can all appreciate wanting to solve that problem, but then the I'm gonna do this part
Yeah.
is very different. So
Oh yeah.
just a quick moment of gratitude from me to you of taking on this journey, because the world's better for it.
Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that. And you're completely spot on. You need so much confidence,
Mm-hmm.
especially because you're being rejected all the time. And if you don't have that confidence to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
it's easy for it to get eroded to a level where you just think, well, I can't do this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Roselle, you mentioned being a woman in cybersecurity, and the industry's changed, thankfully, over the past 10 years. But I can imagine when you started your first company, you were one of few, right? And so the resilience that requires on its own is pretty incredible. And I get this question often, you're a female CRO and there are a few of you. And I love that more women are getting into cybersecurity, but it has been male dominated field for a very long time and still is. And so I think for women out there who are in cybersecurity or thinking about it, Roselle is somebody to look up to, because being that woman in the room who says, I'm credible, I have the confidence, I can sit in this room, we are the same. I think a lot of women out there are intimidated by cybersecurity, and I applaud you for that, because it's really important. We need more women in this industry. And when asked the question, I often say, I hope I'm in the room because of my experience, but I'm proud to be a woman in the room, and it's really great. So women out there who are listening, there's room for you in this industry, and we welcome you with open arms.
Yes, and we
Jessica,
need
before
more
you,
women in the industry. I'm
Yes.
always trying to encourage anyone who is thinking of a career change or is going to be graduating from college soon. I say cybersecurity, lots of opportunity.
So much, yeah. It's just I think
Jessica,
I think
before
often
you,
people are intimidated, and yeah.
yeah,
Go ahead,
before you
Matt.
get to your next question, Jessica, I'm just going to say all the compliments you gave to Roselle are also directed towards you as well. Not to make this episode a gratitude one, but um, I am sitting with very amazing company right now with both of you. So I want to reiterate this. I can't stress it enough, and I won't go into my own like personal thoughts. I'll leave it as a takeaway here. Um, if anyone enters this industry and feels like, oh, maybe this isn't for me and that kind of stuff, I'm just going to volunteer, Jess and Roselle and myself, and say, get in touch with any of the three of us. And I promise you, it's not the case there. If anyone is listening to this and they're like, I feel like this industry isn't for me because of this demographic I'm in or this thing, I just want to issue this blanket statement now. It is not that way. It should not be that way, and you should not feel that way either, right? And I applaud both of you for like being in that position of being like, I know what that journey is like and how tough that road is. But thank you both for what you've done there. Okay. That being said, I apologize. I didn't mean to interrupt, Jess. I
No,
wanted to
you're
make sure
fine.
that the admirability, the admiration extends to both of you. And I also want folks to realize that it is like uh, it's very easy. We all have an inherent bias that we look at the world through, and it's very easy for folks to be dismissive of that or to forget about it, especially in the career that you're in. And it's very important to always take a step back and be cognizant of that, and be cognizant of like, wait a second, how did I get here, and what propelled me towards this? Like I love, absolutely love giving bad guys headaches. Like that's what I love to do. If I can disrupt an attack, if I can be the one to kick a bad guy out of an environment, like that's my spot, right? That's where I want to be. I want to help get there. But the path for me to have the comfort to say that has been very different. And I think we all have to just be respectful of the different journeys that folks take. Anyways, I'm feeling this is just an amazing episode. I'm going to put that there. I'm sorry, Jess. Go ahead.
No, thank you, Matt.
No,
Um, so yeah, Roselle, want to talk about kind of KeyCaliber and who you guys work with, and who's the best fit to work with your company today.
so it's been really interesting because we started initially selling to um, mid market and large enterprises, and so they're much of our customer base now. Um, but what we've been finding over the last 6 months is that managed security service providers, so the MSSPs, MDRs, SOC as a service, I know there are multiple names for the same type of category at this point, um, they really like our product because, so we have two offerings. We have a one-time exposure assessment report where we just need a little bit of data. We can produce this whole report of findings saying, here's what you need to focus on right now. Quick wins that will be the most efficient for reducing risk, improving security posture. And then we also have our continuous deployment where we're hitting APIs and getting the data continuously and providing that view continuously. And the service providers in particular love starting off with the exposure assessment because invariably there's lots that's found. That's a problem. And then that translates very nicely to, well, you need this MDR service. You need these vCISO services. You've got some serious issues. And you need KeyCaliber fully deployed because you want to have this view constantly. And so we're finding that we're developing these great partnerships with the MSSPs and with the consulting companies because they see that our capabilities complement their services very nicely.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. Even in thinking about, a service provider and the services they're providing, and them having a better view into what their customer's exposure looks like before they take that customer on, to try to get them in a good place, so that their services are delivered in a better way. That's really interesting. That makes a ton of sense, actually. We work with a lot of MSSPs, and that's I'm glad I know that now. So that's really cool. Yeah.
There's a lot of really really good takeaways here. I'm curious, Roselle, so your previous company was Up Level, correct? Was it Up-Level Security or just Up-Level?
Yeah.
Up-Level Security, KeyCaliber. I want to revisit the I'm a serial startup founder hat for just a moment here. What was easier the second time around?
Oh, that's a good question.
Of course, there's an
So
assumption that something was easier the second
yeah.
time around as well.
Yeah, so yeah, some was easier. So using the knowledge and experience from the first made getting rolling with the second easier.
Mhm.
The second, in some ways, has been more challenging because of everything that's been going on in the world.
Mhm.
So we started when the pandemic began. Then the war in Ukraine crushed a deal that we were really close with.
Mm.
And then SVB collapsed right before we were going to sign with an investor.
Mm.
And the economy has been a mess for years. So with this one, I say we've been training at altitude the whole
Okay,
time,
I like it.
because that's kind of how it's felt.
Mhm.
But there was plenty that I was able to pull over from my first experience. Certainly the whole process for raising from investors,
Mm.
and definitely having a better feel for who should be part of the team. So number one
Yeah.
takeaway for me is, with the right team, anything is possible. With the wrong team, everything is a struggle.
Yeah. That's got to be one of the best, not the only, but one of the best pieces of advice here is we often speak with founders about their company, right? But it is an important thing to remember that we are actually speaking with founders about their team
Yes.
and the
You
team's
can't do it
ability to
yourself.
deliver on that dream. You can't at all. I mean, some have tried, and like obviously there's always like a Snapchat story, where it's a multi-billion-dollar exit and it's like 8 guys in a room or something like that, right? But it's rare, and if it's anything, it's once in a million that it actually happens. Otherwise, we're speaking to folks about their team. How important is it for you? And I think you started to allude to this already, but how important is it for you in the very beginning of a startup? And I'm looking at this as advice for others, to start to assemble a team that empowers you. Like how early do you want to start doing that?
So it depends on your skill set,
Mhm.
because your team always needs to round out the skills that are needed. So for me, I don't code. I mean,
Mhm.
my last coding class was 20 years ago, over 20 years ago. My
Mhm.
daughter can code better than I can. And so I needed to have a CTO right away.
Mhm.
And so, and I'm very fortunate, I have an amazing CTO. He's a hacker in both senses of the word. I mean,
Love it.
he began his career doing offensive security,
Mhm.
or offensive cyber, and he just knows how to work really fast, which is the speed you need
Yeah.
when you have a startup. So that was the skill set that I needed to bring in right away.
Mhm.
If you're the reverse and you're the software engineer, then you need someone to handle the business side,
Mhm.
and to be interacting with the customers, the investors, and other employees. So it really depends on what you're bringing to the table, but you do want to have complementary skill sets across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good consideration for anyone who's starting is to, again, and I know I mentioned this earlier too, but identify your strengths and play to those as you build the company, as you build things up. And then obviously the inverse, the necessary inverse of that is know where you're weak. And it's not a bad weakness. I don't think it's a bad thing to say, I'm going to grow this company, but I have zero idea how to manage revenue and forecasting. I'm going to find someone who does, because there's just some things where the business needs you focused on what you're good at. And that's where you should be, as opposed to, well, I'll figure out how to do this as we go along. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely a little bit of I think of like a founder's story or journey where folks are like, I didn't know anything about sales, so I went and took a class and I figured it out, and then I did this and I did that, blah blah, and everything. And the trade-off that I often hear is, I would have been where I was at year 2 at 18 months if I had hired so and so, right? I would have seen a 6-month earlier trajectory, or I would have been able to have reached the point much earlier if I had just hired the right people. And I think it's always an interesting task to be like, all right, what do I need help with right now? Because I know that there's something's going to suffer, right? And again, it's like I can go a mile deep and an inch wide, or I can go an inch wide, or sorry, an inch deep and a mile wide on those. And if you're starting something for the first time, there are so many things that need to be done. I always visualize like all these columns with progress bars, and you can chunk them up however you want, right? Tech, finance, investors, sales, coding, engineering, whatever it is, however you break it up. You as a single individual cannot maintain 100% across all of those. There's just not enough time in the day. We need to sleep as well. You can't give that up, or else again it spirals, right? If you're like, I can do all of this, I only need 3 hours of sleep, then your health suffers, and then the company suffers, because you're the one maintaining all those progress bars. And I think my big takeaway here for everyone is, know when you need help and know when you're not the best at something, and go find someone who you can work with on that, right? Reach out when you need help for it. So that's, Roselle, that's an awesome takeaway there. I'm learning so much on this episode, Jess. I'm sitting back and just kind of taking it all in. It's not that I don't learn on other episodes. It's just that Roselle's so insightful and succinct and to the point. It's awesome. Gosh, what a good conversation. Roselle, another question for you about, let's continue with that. Like, what it takes to get into your customers' environments from a competitive landscape. I think you talked about fighting change and then fighting older processes, right? Spreadsheets and things like that. What other things do you see on the competitive landscape there? Like, what other hurdles do you guys run into from either an implementation perspective, or kind of a marketing or adoption perspective? And I'm just curious to see like what other types of things you run into.
Yeah, well, 2023 ran into a lot of, we lost our budget, or our champion was laid off,
Mm.
or there was a reorg and the champion no longer has the same clout. And
Yeah.
there was a ton of that in 2023. Very tumultuous year.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. I mean, it's a challenge at any point, but last year was particularly insane with all of that.
Oh gosh. That's
Yeah.
that's a it's really interesting, right? I'm hoping, Jess, that we continue to have these conversations for years, right? And Roselle, I want to like revisit this with you in a few years and be like, remember 2023? Remember 2024, right? Because I can say to everybody, remember 2020, remember 2021. I mean, I can say that to my kids, and they're like, I'll never forget that year, right? And I think it's like we sometimes lose perspective that no, this just last year was a tumultuous year as well. And this year it's going to be different. But yeah, I appreciate that. I think that it is another valid concern for folks to keep in mind as they try to work their way into their ICP, or as they try to work their way into that customer environment. And Roselle, I'm curious, have you ever had this happen like mid POC or mid demo?
We've had it at every step.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we had it where we had completed a successful POC,
Mm-hmm.
and then the champion leaves and says, "Oh, and by the way, because I'm leaving, my budget was taken." So, I mean, we've seen it all.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, fellow founders out there, the hurdles are many, and they are scattered like a minefield. So watch out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You cannot count anything until the deal is signed. And even then, you don't count it until the money's in the bank.
Money's in the bank. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And these challenges face everyone, right? Like big organizations and small organizations. But herein lies the difference. When you're an early stage company, revenue is so important, and every POC is so critical that you feel that much more intensely than you would at a big organization where you've got 200 sellers out there, selling your product. And I totally understand and feel that in my soul. And I'm sure Matt does as well, right? It's the battle we fight every day. So yeah, that's a great point to bring up. Roselle, this has been incredible. And so the last question that I have for you is, if you could give anyone out there who's maybe thinking about starting a company, or somebody who just started a company, one piece of advice, really, what would that be? I know you've dropped a lot of them throughout the episode, but let's get one more out of you.
I would say, at the end of the day, there's so much that requires this external validation, but you have to have the internal validation. Getting to what we were talking about earlier with the confidence, that has to be at the core. Mm-hmm. If you have that, you can build everything else around it. If you don't have it, you're just going to be beaten up, and it's not going to work. So it has to start with you having that confidence in the idea, knowing that the idea may change. So there needs to still be flexibility in it, mm-hmm. but confidence that you have at least the beginning point of something that's solid, and you have the confidence that you can adjust and do the journey. Mm-hmm. And it has to come from within before you can get any of that external validation.
Roselle, we seldom close out this episode with an episode with such an impactful piece of advice. I don't have much to say other than thank you for being here. Yeah. Wow. What an episode. What a conversation. Jess, I'll let you close us out.
Yeah.
Roselle, if you want to take a moment and actually describe KeyCaliber, maybe one last, cool 30-second thing for us.
Yeah. So we're in the space of continuous threat exposure management. So we're showing what you have, what's most important, what's most at risk, and how you can quickly improve your security and risk posture. So it's fundamental to any cybersecurity program. If you look at NIST CSF, it's the identify phase. And frankly, NIST CFS should be shaped like a pyramid. That's how I always shape it, because the identify phase really needs to be strong. That's your fundamentals. If you have that in place and it's solid, you can build the rest of the program on top of it in an efficient way. And so that's what we're doing, just getting organizations to a point where they know the ground truth and they know how to improve.
Fantastic. And Roselle, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are going to be interested in learning more. So where can they learn more about your company?
KeyCaliber.com, KeyCaliber.com.
Fantastic. So thank you, Roselle. This has been incredible. And I'm sure we're going to have another episode with you down the line. And thank you again to our listeners. We can't do this without you. And we really hope that we're adding value, every episode, and welcome your feedback. So Thank you, guys. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Roselle. And to everyone out there, take care.
Thank you both.